In today's macro photography video, we're going to be doing some UV photography. We're going to be making some flowers glow in supernatural colors. Stick around and I'll explain more in just a sec. Hi guys, I'm Ben from Adaptalux and welcome back to another macro photography tutorial where today we're shooting flowers. It's been a while since I've shot some flowers and it's also been a while since I've done some UV photography. So we're going to be combining flower photography and UV photography to create some otherworldly shots of these flowers. Now, the otherworldly effects are going to come from a specialist technique called UVIVF photography. That stands for ultraviolet induced visible fluorescence photography. It's a bit of a mouthful, and I will explain what that means. But essentially, all you need is a pure UV light source and a dark room. You don't need to modify your camera or anything like that, at least not with our light sources that we're using today. So I'll talk more about how this is achieved, and of course, I'll set up for a shot of some of our flowers. We've covered UV photography in the past, and I will link up in the top right hand corner to a full introduction video on UVIVF photography and the difference between UVIVF and reflected UV photography. Having said that, I will recap very briefly here because it's a little bit difficult to understand if you're picturing that type of black and white portrait photography that you might have seen where people's faces are showing the sun damage and you've got sunscreen on their face maybe, and it all looks black. It's all black and white. There's no color in the reflected UV photography. That's because that's requiring a full spectrum converted camera to actually be able to capture the UV rays themselves as they reflect off the subject, hence reflected UV. That's not the type of photography that we're doing today. We're doing UVIVF photography, so UV-induced visible fluorescence photography. Again, a bit of a mouthful, but let me explain what that actually means. It means that we don't have to convert our camera at all. All we're doing is capturing visible light that has been induced in a subject. So we're going to be putting our flowers under a lot of UV light, and then those flowers are going to glow. This is the UV inducing fluorescence in our subject. Most living subjects, i.e. plants, some animals, insects, all fluoresce just a little bit. Now it is a very, very small amount, so we're going to need to have a lot of UV light. That UV light is going to have to be very pure, and we're going to have to do all of this in the complete darkness of a blacked out room. It all sounds a little bit extra, a lot of effort, but we're going to be absolutely amazed by the results, and I guarantee it is worth the wait, worth the effort to go about blacking out your room and getting some UV light down onto a subject, because the light that is induced and fluoresced by the subject is usually completely different to how the subject actually looks in real life. The flowers will create all sorts of different colors and it will look very otherworldly. And because the subject itself is actually creating the light that we're photographing, then things look a little bit different. It's not the same as simply shining some colored light onto a subject. It's very, very different and a very unique way of taking photographs. Let's talk a little bit about how we're going to create that UV light and place it down onto our flowers. So here's my camera and here is my lighting, and you'll notice that this lighting has flexible long arms to reach all the way around to my flowers and point only where I need them to point. This is fantastic for macro photography in particular, but also flowers where you can direct the light into the exact parts of the flower that you want. For example, these roses, I might want to light half of the flower a little bit more than the other half, bring in light from different directions and backlight these petals. Now, if this was conventional light, you would see a rather bright light coming from each one of these three lighting arms. However, this is not conventional light. What we have here is three UV lighting arms plugged into the Adaptalux control pod. We can have up to 5 lighting arms plugged in here. For this shot, I think I'm only going to need 3, and you can see that there's absolutely no light coming from these because this is pure UV light. Now in this ambient brightness, you can see it's quite bright here in this room. You're not going to see anything from here. You're not going to see any glow from the flowers because we need to be able to take this shot in complete darkness. I'm going to be turning out the lights here and at that point we'll be able to take a long exposure of my flower, and this UV light is going to create a fluorescent glow in the flowers themselves. That's going to have to be done with a long exposure, hence all of my camera equipment being on a sturdy tripod. Nothing can move during your shot. We're talking 30-second exposures here, so we're going to want our camera and tripod to stay still for that amount of time. The same for our subject. We can't have any wind blowing on our flowers or anything like that. All of that will ruin our shot. So the UV lighting arms here are absolutely key to creating some UV IVF shots. Next up, I want to try something a little bit different, and that's by adding tonic water to my flowers. I want to add an extra light source into my scene, and I'm going to be doing that by using the super fluorescent quinine in the tonic water. By placing down some little splashes of tonic water inside my flowers, that tonic water is going to glow hopefully far more than the flower itself and cast an extra little bit of light in the places that I placed that water. So I might try some bigger drops, but then also spray some smaller drops across the petals. I'm going to experiment and see what happens. But using tools like hyper fluorescent tonic water or maybe some UV inks is a really interesting way to approach UV IVF photography. It's also going to have the effect of reducing our shutter times. So I should be able to push those long exposures down to a much more reasonable long exposure and still get a really interesting photograph. Now I'm going to simply grab a pipette and a spray bottle and spray some of my flowers with some tonic water and quite simply check out the effect that that has. Applying my tonic water, I've done it in a couple of different ways. Firstly, I've got a little pipette dropper just here, which has leaked out all over the table, but not to worry, it'll just be a little bit sticky. But I can place big drops of tonic water into the center of my flowers just using a little pipette here. It's nice to be quite controlled, at least to begin with. However, I did also want to try spraying my flowers completely with tonic water, and you can see that some of my flowers have nice droplets covering all of their surface, and every single one of these droplets is going to glow a really bright blue. It's important to understand, however, that this is a one-shot deal. If you cover your subject in tonic water like this, there's no getting rid of it. This flower will now forever glow under UV, so there's no good trying this and then deciding that you don't quite like the effect and trying to get rid of it. If you put tonic water onto your flowers, they're going to glow in all sorts of weird ways. So just be aware of that before you start playing with super fluorescent materials like this or UV ink. I'd like to know from you guys in the comment section which type of UV IVF shot you prefer. Do you like those flowers looking a little bit more natural, showing off the natural fluorescence and how the flower itself is creating light? Or do you prefer that more creative option of adding some hyper fluorescent material in the form of our tonic water, creating otherworldly orbs of light inside the flower? I'm not sure which I prefer yet, but I'm going to mull this over and probably try it a few more times because it's very addictive. UV IVF photography, it's one of those types of photography where there's a big time investment and you sit there in the dark thinking, what am I spending my time on? But then the photo shows up on the back of the camera and it's all absolutely worth it, and your time investment has paid off tenfold. I definitely recommend anybody that's even curious about experimental types of photography like this to give it a go. I will link again down in the description to the UV pack that you need. We've got a pack just dedicated to UV that provides everything that you need to get started, so I'll link to that for you. Make sure to hit the like button if you enjoyed this video. Hit the subscribe button for lots more macro photography tutorials, ideas and inspiration coming in the future. But for now, that is all I've got time for. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.